Welcome, Peter, to the show. Really excited about this conversation. It's going to be unique for our podcast and really beneficial to the audience. Will you please let people know about your background and what you're doing today?
Sure, Dave. Thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to be with you and your listeners today. My background, I started off in the national security world. So, I grew up, saw Top Gun and wanted to be Maverick, but, going Mach 3 with my hair on fire sounded great. My dad was actually in the Navy, so I was fortunate enough to go to the Naval Academy and got about halfway through where we do what they call a pre-commissioning physical, and they check you out, make sure there's nothing wrong with you, so you can go do, go be Maverick. And saw the eye doctor at the academy, and he said, "Well, Midshipman Grimm, I'm sorry, it doesn't look like you're going to be able to be Maverick. In fact, there's something wrong with your right eye, and you can't be Goose either." So after that sort of heartbreak of not becoming a pilot, I wound up driving ships for about 6 years in the Navy. Was on a destroyer out in Pearl Harbor, and then went to a special boat unit, which basically is the best way to think of that is kind of the bus driver for the SEALs. So we had, really fast buses with lots of guns on them, and we would pick up the SEALs and take them where they needed to go, drop them off, and they'd go do whatever it was that they couldn't tell us about, and then we'd pick them up when they were done. And that was a really tremendous job, probably the best job still to this day that I've ever had.
Sounds totally cool.
Yeah, it was really fun, really, really fun. I left the Navy and went into the government as a civilian and was a counterterrorism analyst at one of the three-letter agencies for a few years. I focused almost exclusively on the Middle East, spent a lot of time in Iraq. I was in Iraq quite a bit, and during sort of the worst part of that conflict in 05, 06, 07. Had the opportunity in that role to do some really, really interesting things with some very high-speed folks in the military, and had the opportunity to brief President Bush, the second President Bush, in the Oval Office a couple of times, which was just phenomenal. So really, as a relatively young person, late 20s, early 30s, I was exposed to some really kind of high-level decision-making, and had the opportunity to play a small role in that. About 2008, I left the government and went to Deloitte. So a bit of a career change, but went from sort of counterterrorism and intelligence work to strategy consulting, and spent about 8 years at Deloitte in the strategy practice there. And I was really struck by how similar the processes are of trying to understand the competitive landscape and the market environment that a business is operating in a way that allows them to make smart decisions. I was really struck at how similar that process is to the intelligence analysis process, and found a lot of parallels there. And one of the things that I saw in that world as I was, being a consultant and helping companies develop growth strategies was that they spent a lot of time and effort, probably much more than they needed to, particularly in big companies in certain industries. They'd have, enormous amounts of data and people devoted to collecting information and trying to make sense of it. I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And I drew on some of my experience in the intelligence community and some of the tools we used in that role, and joined the company I'm with now. It's called Cipher. I joined back about 5 years ago, and we've developed a software product, a software as a service application called Knowledge 360 that now helps companies automate a lot of that intelligence work. So collecting information from all these different sources, making sense of it, organizing that information, and giving those humans back more of their time to make sense of it and to help add value to the business and help make better decisions. So that's a little bit of my background.
Well, I'm really struck with this competitive analysis thing because a lot of entrepreneurs don't do this well. Yeah. They shoot from the hip. They have an idea what they do, and unless they're in a startup where they think they're doing something unique, a lot of times they can't even articulate why they're unique in their business. So where are you helping people? Is it more on the competitive analysis side, or is it helping them understand the strategy piece, which you mentioned, of here's how you're unique, or do they overlap? So you're kind of doing both.
It really is a little bit of both, right? And we do a lot of work with companies where we talk about sources of competitive advantage. And I've had this conversation, in big companies, big enterprises that have been around a long time, been very successful for a long time. I've had this conversation with entrepreneurs who are just starting out. I ask the same question when I'm in a room with executives, whether it's sort of the head of a startup or a group of C-suite folks in a big company. And I'll ask them, what is it that sets you apart? We have a conversation about differentiation. And almost without exception, every time I ask a company that question, the first answer out of somebody's mouth in that room is, we have the best people. And, I will immediately, after that answer comes out, I'll generally challenge them and say, well, that's what your competitors all tell me too. And so it's not possible for both statements to be true. You can't both have the best people. So let's dig into that a little bit more. And we start to talk about aspects of differentiation that are real, that are not just marketing speak, that truly, I don't have a competitor out there that can replicate this capability or this offering or this value proposition or whatever it might be. So we tend to start there. And then we frame most of our work with companies around that. Really, that's the hardest part, is truly understanding those sources of a competitive advantage, because then you can use intelligence and the capabilities that brings to protect that competitive advantage, to enhance it, to exploit opportunities where that advantage gives you a leg up. So that's where we start.
So can you give me an example of a company where you went through that exercise? You don't have to necessarily name names, but of course, you're from the intelligence community. You never name names, or else I'd be in trouble. So, but an example would help, particularly when we're thinking about anybody in a business environment. And it's funny because they love the mantra, we have the best people. I understand that. Yeah. But they're not functioning well, but we have the best people.
And it feels good to say, right? And it's important to believe in your team. And, I, in my current role, feel like I have a great team of people around me, and I think they're the best in the world. But to truly understand competitive advantage, you have to get beyond that. So to give you an example, not too long ago, we were working with a heavy manufacturing company. And this is a company that's been around for a long time. They've been, very successful over the years. They've done a lot of M&A, and they've grown the company substantially. And we had this conversation about what sets you apart. And we got the first answer was, we have the best people. Our sales reps are the most trusted, and our customers, they trust Bob when he goes into a meeting that Bob's going to give them, what it is they need, and he'll give them advice and so forth. And we started to unpack that a little bit and look at some of the other competitors in the space. And sure enough, they all approach things more or less the same way. There's a lot of focus in that industry around those sort of face-to-face interactions and the interpersonal relationships that a sales rep develops with their customers. But once you peel that back a little bit, this company really did have some true advantages that they weren't harnessing. They knew customers better. They've been around longer than anybody else. They understood their customers' businesses in ways that their competitors didn't. And they just weren't exploiting that. So what I mean by understanding their customers' businesses, they'd see a customer struggling with, a particular aspect of their operational line. And in theory, this is outside, the scope of what my client organization would do, but they've seen other customers of theirs struggle with this. With a little coaching, we said, well, what if you could be a little bit more consultative and actually partner with your customer to solve this problem in their operations and make that customer more successful? You have an opportunity to not only develop sort of relationship equity with that customer, but how much more likely are they going to be to come to you when they need products or when they have another challenge? It also allows you to be much more innovative. because you can see problems that your customers are having before others can. And that's in my experience, the hardest part of really doing effective innovations is understanding what the problem is you're trying to solve.
Yeah, it's interesting because the relationship is critical. I mean, efficiencies in your team, skill sets are critical. You have to have that to play in the game.
Sure.
And then the relationships are important, or you really can't establish the business and have it grow at all. However, it's fascinating that you're saying that they had the relationships, they had great people, but still they weren't maximizing because they had missed, they just didn't see how to apply that to take it to the next level. It sounds like once they went where you're recommending, they kind of put a huge wall around and a moat, where competitors really probably couldn't get in at all unless it was just an area they didn't want to play in.
That's right. And it's, in that particular industry, the differences between the competitive products are relatively marginal. This product does what it does. And in a lot of cases, they were getting trapped in price wars, and who could undercut the other guy to win that business. And through these conversations, I said to him, look, that's a death spiral. Nobody wins in that situation, right? So why don't we think about ways that we can bring more value to the customer outside of just the product? How do we help them solve problems? We also, by the way, it was a packaging firm actually that I'm referring to. And, they have insights about the end user of their customers. How do they use that product that's in the packaging that my client made? And so can you provide insights to, the customer who's putting their product in your packaging about what their customers value in the differences of the different packaging options? And really through doing that, you have an opportunity to set yourself apart. It's no longer just a commodity product that, it's all about price. You can bring a lot more value to that relationship when you approach things that way. But it starts by having a really critical discussion or really thinking critically about what the sources of competitive advantage are that your company has and that your competitors have.
So can you please walk us through the process? Because it sounds like you've got this software product, but at the front end, there really needs to be some consulting and some unearthing of what the unique things can be. And then ultimately, it sounds like then you plug people into the software and the coaching consulting kind of backs off, and it's maybe on an as needed basis, or maybe it's ongoing, I don't know. But then the software is doing a lot of the work and the people have been trained how to apply what they learned. So can you walk us through that a little bit? What does that look like timeframe wise, step by step?
Sure. The approach varies a little bit by industry. It also varies by sort of, we have kind of a maturity model that we've built around, where is a given company in terms of their capabilities to understand their sources of competitive advantage, leverage those, defend those, and then monitor the environment for threats to those, right? So it's sort of working up that ladder. When we initially start a conversation with a new client, it's first about understanding where they are in that process. So once we've done that, if they already have a pretty good sense of, we'll have those conversations about differentiation and sources of competitive advantage. And if we feel like we've got a pretty good handle on that, and now it's just about watching for disruption in the industry, and everybody's, every industry we work in now is concerned about Amazon coming into their space. And so there's lots of technological advances happening. So once you get that baseline understanding of, who are the key competitors? How do we stack up against them? How do we benchmark against them? What are our true sources of competitive advantage? Then it becomes about watching the environment. And that's really where the intelligence process comes in and where our software plays. So you're right in that we will typically start with a relationship with a client from a consulting standpoint to help understand where they are, fill in any gaps they might have in terms of their understanding of the marketplace or their competitors. We can bring capabilities to bear to do that. But once we've got that sort of baseline understanding, then we're watching for changes. And we work through a whole process with companies around sort of identifying sources of disruption, potential sources of disruption, and then watching those over time. And that's really where the software comes in. So you're right, it does tend to be sort of consulting on the front end, and then we'll get them up to a place where they're sort of watching the environment instead of trying to understand it.
Can you give me some examples of quote unquote sources of disruption?
Sure. So there's a great framework, actually. There's several that we look at, but Dr. Amy Webb out of MIT has a great framework that I commend to everybody, where she talks about sort of 11 sources of disruption. I won't go through it here. We don't have time, but I encourage everyone to look that up. My former firm has done some great work around sort of patterns of disruption and catalysts of disruption, where they looked at 150 case studies or somewhere in that neighborhood, and said, what are the commonalities across all of these disruptive case studies? And they came up with sort of 9 patterns that are very common. So they talk about things like expanding marketplace reach, turning products into platforms, and there's lots of case studies that sort of illustrate those trends. So it's really about having a conversation about understanding how disruption happens, understanding first our sources of competitive advantage that we have to protect, like we talked about sort of at the top, and then looking at the intersection of those and saying, well, if my source of competitive advantage is the quality of my products or my ability to deliver them fastest or whatever it might be, you can think about how might technology change that, how might regulatory changes impact that competitive advantage, how might geopolitical factors impact that advantage, and so forth. And then so you can sort of go through that process of finding potential disruptors, and then you apply another set of intelligence principles called indications and warning. And so if we identified, for instance, we did this with a large coatings company, one of the biggest sort of paint companies in the world, and we looked at a potential disruptor of autonomous painting, right? And so if it becomes the case that there's no longer sort of the professional painting contractor and his crew of humans who come to paint your house or paint the commercial building, but it's actually done by robots, this has a lot of implications for that paint company and how they go to market and how they target, who their actual customers even are, if they're not selling to those painting contractors anymore. Do they want to enter that business in terms of, maybe they want to own the hardware? They want to own the robots and lease them to the painting contractors. And so there's all sorts of things to think about. But then you think about the indicators of that. And we start that process by saying, well, why doesn't this exist today? Why are there not robots that paint your house today? And then you can work backwards, sort of what are the technology hurdles that haven't been overcome, or what are the adoption curves that people are traveling along, or maybe it's just not economical yet. Once you understand what those indicators are, you can watch them, and you can watch them evolve over time. So you can get a pretty good sense of, we think in 5 years, I'm making these numbers up, but let's say we think in 5 years, half of our professional painting contractor customers are going to be using robots. That gives us time to plan and take advantage of that as it comes.
I never even thought of that, having robots.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, the concept of a robot coming into this office or house and painting or doing the exterior.
Yeah. It's coming.
It's coming, huh? That's
there's lots of it. Yeah, you can go watch the videos. They have drones that'll paint the outside of building, literally flying around with a sprayer on them. It's really fascinating stuff.
Wow. That's kind of scary what it looks like for the workforce.
It does, yeah. I mean, that's going, that trend is happening across industries, right? But if you're in the setting of trying to set corporate strategy, these processes and these tools can give you insights that provide the time to plan. So you can be the first mover, you can exploit the opportunity as opposed to all of a sudden being surprised by it.
Do some of the people use your tools to track a particular segment of the economy or some economic data that's going to affect them, although it may not affect other companies, or maybe it's going to affect everybody type of thing? Is that typically part of what they're tracking, or is that really not part of the equation?
It certainly can be. In some industries, like the packaging client I mentioned to you, that business historically is very cyclical and tied to GDP, in each country. So there's a sort of a direct linkage that they watch pretty closely. In some industries, it's entirely counter-cyclical. But fundamentally, what the platform does is bring together information from lots of different sources. And what we find is that people get mired in, we refer to it as the sort of death cycle of competitive intelligence or competitive analysis. The common scenario that we see, particularly in these big companies, is something will happen in the market that surprises them, surprises leadership. They didn't anticipate it, whether it's an M&A deal when competitors merged, or there's a regulatory change that they didn't think was coming, or some competitive move that they didn't expect. And once they finish sort of reacting to that, the impetus becomes to figure out, how do we not get surprised again? Right? We need some sort of intelligence function to make sure this doesn't happen. And they'll task generally a reasonably junior person to put together a team who shows some promise, and they say, go do intelligence and make sure we don't get surprised again. And that person will then go, well, how am I going to make sure we don't get surprised again? I need data. And it might be the economic data you mentioned. It might be, I need to see every press release that comes out of my competitors. I need to see, I want to see who my competitors are hiring. I want to look at job postings. I need to be watching their social feeds and understand what they're talking about in the market. Oh, I also need to be watching what people are saying about us and competitors on social. I need to have an understanding of IP. What if somebody files a new patent? We need to be aware of that. And it very quickly gets unmanageable. And so they wind up spending a lot of money on data, and they realize they don't have time to make sense of this data. So they hire more people. So now they're spending even more money, all in an effort not to get surprised again. And, the economic cycles happen, business cycles happen, the downturn comes, the budget man comes calling, and they'll say, okay, intelligence function, what have you delivered? And it's really hard to point to any value that you've had. You spent a lot of money, but you haven't brought a lot of value to the decision-making process in the company. And so we've seen that play out a lot over the years in corporate America. And so the platform we designed is really designed to be an answer to that. So how do we automate? There's a lot of low value work that goes into doing intelligence. You have to collect all this information. You have to organize it. You have to sort of tag it and understand where everything is. You got to filter out all the noise, and there's more noise than ever today to get to that signal. And that's where people get stuck. They wind up just devoting headcount to that. And our technology is really designed to automate as much as we can of that low value work, so that the person who's charged with not being surprised can actually make sense of all the information that's coming in and drive value back into the business. And the insights we talked about, like autonomous painting and those sorts of things. If I've got a tool that's helping me aggregate all that stuff, helping me filter out noise, helping pre-process it before a human's even looking at it, you're a lot more likely to spot something like that. You're a lot more likely to see, the new entrant that nobody's heard of before they make a big splash in the Wall Street Journal. So that's where we focus.
So obviously you guys at Cipher are the experts in, the consulting and then how to use the tool, but it sounds like this is a tool that also could be used by a variety of consultants who do some similar work, maybe not at the level you do, or maybe they have a particular specialty, but they could also use the tool in their work with their clients. Am I right?
That's true. And we have a number of sort of agencies and consulting partners that use the tool in that way. We've also got a number of clients in sort of service industries, maybe not consultants, but think of law firms and those types of things, where they need to be able to watch what's happening with their clients to be able to spot opportunities to bring their value to those clients. So, if I can spot, if I'm a big law firm and I can see before anybody else that my client is headed for a legal pickle, that gives me a leg up, right? To be able to go and talk to them about where we see a challenge and how we might be able to help. So there's the BD application or business development application in some cases as well.
That's interesting because I work a lot with IT solution providers. And one of the things that the smart ones are doing is they're actually becoming a business consultant where they're catching things that are going wrong, and potentially they could use it as a tool to be aware of things that are happening in their industry, the client's industry, and then identifying ways to work on that. Now, I have a question that's a little bit out of range here a little bit, but you got this fascinating background, in the military and the intelligence community, doing all these things. What is, like, if you had to design your dream project that you were going to do right now, Peter, what would that client look like, or what would that project look like?
Well, I mean, I will tell you that the journey we're on right now at Cipher is part of that. Right? That is the answer to that question from my standpoint. Is if we can help companies solve these challenges, and in the process of doing so, grow a successful business, then I call that a win on several levels. If there was a project, I'll give you some sense of some things we're working on now that I think are really cool. So when we launched the product 3 years ago, a lot of the uptake initially was in the insurance space. So big health insurance companies were some of our first and biggest clients. And if you think about how they look at the world, they have lots of markets that they compete in. Every state's a different market. In some cases, provinces and so forth, and different regulators, different competitors, different pricing. So they got to maintain a picture of all of that. So there was an immediate sort of use case for us. Now we're sort of moving into the life sciences realm, and we've recently been brought in to partner with one of the big pharmaceutical companies. And we're really excited about that because there's so much focus in that industry on the competition and time to market, as you know, in the branded pharmaceutical world is crucial. Who gets that little blue pill out on the market first is a big deal. And it's very complicated to understand that picture. So that's been really fun for us. And we're baking some new data and some new features into the platform specifically for that industry, which are really cool, and we're really excited.
Interesting. So how do people, any closing thoughts, and then really, how do people get a hold of you? Because I really think this is, if nothing else, they need to go to your website and just read some of the materials you have available. You probably have some video links and some things going on. And they really need to take a look at this, because in this crazy economy where things could go up or down, in an instant, so many people forget what 2008 was like. Okay.
Right.
And they need to be aware of all their options. And I'm sure you've got some great info for them to consider. And it might be, they need to engage you. So any closing thoughts? And then what's the best way to learn more?
This has been really fun, David. And just as, a closing thought, I would just encourage everybody to really start with that really critical discussion about competitive advantage. Because you can't do any of these other things that we're talking about until you really understand that. And you have to get beyond the marketing speak. You have to get beyond, what your marketing team is telling the world sets you apart, and really understand for yourself. So I'd start there. And then, of course, we'd love to talk to any of your listeners that want to learn more. They can go to our website. It's Cipher-sys. So it's CIPHER-SYS.com. All sorts of resources there. There's lots of stuff we've written on these topics that you can take a peek at for free. And if you want to speak to us, we'd be more than happy to.
Fabulous, Peter. Well, really, thank you very much for the insights today. And I got to check it out myself. So I'm interested.
Very good, David. Thanks a lot for having me.